Hello, welcome to the Canon R6 setup video guide. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Okay, so we want to change the mode dial to the movie icon there, and then just switch it on, like so, and then we'll just get that back into place. So I really like the Canon cameras. Their menu systems are relatively straightforward. So we're starting at page 5 of the setup and resetting to basic settings there. Simple. So here what I'll do is I'll just switch it to screen so it's constantly on the screen. Now if you want to sort of like obviously have it in viewfinder, you can select it viewfinder, or you can have it auto switching. The auto 2 is the one you want. If you put your eye onto the viewfinder, then it will switch to the viewfinder, but I'm just going to keep it on screen for the time being. You'll notice there's a little sensor there which detects when your eye is being placed in front of the viewfinder. It's a bit annoying though, because if you kind of like move your finger in front of a sensor, it will switch to the viewfinder, which is what we're trying to avoid in this instance. And then down here, I'm going to switch the beep to disable. And then under the power savings, I'm just going to switch the display off to the maximum duration, and then auto power to disable and viewfinder to disable as well. Okay, so let's just make sure the camera's back on straight a little bit. There we go. So back into the menu, and eco mode is off. And then here, I'm going to just format my inserted card, which is in slot number 1. And then it's obviously pertinent to set the date and the time, and is actually the correct date time. But if it's not, then just go through these settings here, the right time, region, etc. But that's all good. So I'm going to come out of that now. Okay, so that's all kind of done for that sort of part of it. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go all the way to page 1 over here, and we want the shooting mode to be on the movie manual exposure. This allows us to adjust the exposure triangle, i.e. the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO according to what we're trying to achieve within the shot. Okay. You'll also notice that on the top left here there's also a touch screen icon that you can change, which effectively does the same thing. Okay. With video mode you generally want that one to be manual exposure. I never use the auto. Okay. So back to the menu again. So what we're going to do now is go down to the second item within the Shoot 1 menu, and then select the movie record quality, and then with the record size, you can see there's a whole host of different options there, which can be a bit confusing at first. Essentially, if you want to shoot 4K 50 frames per second, then just choose the 4K 50 frames per second standard. You can see that with the light, the same settings, you're just getting longer record time. So it's basically still 4K, but it's more compressed, but you're able to record for longer. So if the duration is more important than the quality, then knock it down to light. Otherwise, just stick with standard. So whether you're shooting 4K 50 frames per second for 50% slow motion, or 4K 25 frames per second where you don't want slow motion, or full HD 50 frames per second, 50% slow motion, or full HD 25 frames per second, non-slow motion. Just choose the standard ones and ignore the light ones. Okay, so in this instance I'm just going to shoot some 4K standard here and keep that there. Now underneath you can see under the movie record size you've also got a high frame rate, which is disabled at the moment. But what you can do, you can enable that, and then you can see the settings changing there, and it's like full HD at 100 frames per second. So this allows you to shoot video footage and get it to 25% slow motion, which is slower again. What's great about this is that it records it in camera, and the downside of it is that it doesn't record audio, so it's mute. Okay, so let's just press OK there, and we're just going to disable that because we're not going to do any 25 frames per second stuff there. Okay, if we disabled that, And then we're going to go into movie record and select 4K 25 frames per second again, like so. Okay, and then come out of the menu there. So what we're going to do is just set the exposure triangle. So the shutter speed, the aperture and the ISO. So with the shutter speed, the rule of thumb, if you've seen in the video fundamentals, is just take the frames per second, which in this instance is 25 frames per second, double it and put 1 over it, and you get a 50th, and you give it a nice smooth motion blur. Obviously in this instance, you're not going to have any motion, but that's the kind of general rule that we stick to when we're making kind of particularly narrative driven films. So 1/50th there. Okay, and then with the aperture and the ISO, you essentially want to have a fairly low ISO to get the noise levels down, ideally choose an aperture that gives you the depth of field that you want for your particular shot. Okay, so I'm kind of a bit limited with my zoom lens at 5.6, so I'm going to have to just increase my ISO up a little bit. Now it's important that you get the right ISO when we're shooting in C-Log or C-Log 3, but we'll come to that in a separate section later on. Okay, you can also obviously get your info up and have a look at your histogram to check to see if your exposure is round about the same right area. Ultimately, the exposure, or the correct exposure, is the exposure that gives you the results that you want. But generally speaking, you obviously want to just be looking at the darker areas and the brighter areas, and just making sure that everything fits within the dynamic range of the camera and not either overexposing or underexposing. Particularly with the underexposed areas, you could possibly be hiding some noise. So when you increase the exposure in post-production, you'll just be raising those noise levels. So sometimes it's quite a good idea to slightly overexpose so that you don't get that sort of situation. But as it does depend though, because if you're outside and it's a bright sunny day, or you've got any brighter areas in your shot, you also want to have the opposing view of trying to protect those highlights as well. Okay, so it's just one of those things that you'll navigate and kind of get the feel of. Now what we're going to do now is set the white balance. So if we go into the quick access menu, you could also access it by pressing the Q button there, and you'll see there's the AWB button. You generally don't want to use automatic white balance. You can use any of these presets if your conditions that you find yourself in are consistent with the presets. For example, a bright sunny day, in the shade, cloudy, etc. Okay. Now you can set the Kelvin value, which is basically more eyeballing it. So the way you do that, you press the set button, and then you just look at your scene, and you're basically making a judgment about whether it's cooler or warmer than what the camera's interpreting the scene as, and you want to just match it so it's close to what your eyes are seeing. Okay, so it's not an exact science in that regard, but it's actually quite an intuitive and straightforward way. And what you're trying to minimize, because you're recording a baked in sort of value in terms of the white balance, it's not raw video, you can't change the white balance after the event. It's better just to do the white balance, and then you only have to make minor adjustments, or any adjustments you might not even have to make at all. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You have to set the white balance. Now, if you want to sort of set it as a custom white balance, then if you go into custom there, and then just select this one here. Okay, but what you need to do is a bit different than setting the custom white balance in stills mode. You can't do it the same way. It just doesn't allow you to do it the same in video mode, which is a bit annoying. So what you need to do is we'll set it first of all to manual mode, first of all in the sort of stills mode, if you like. And then what you have to do is just take a picture of an 18% grey card if you've got it. Okay. And what you're trying to do is just fill the screen up so you've got the 18% grey, and then just take a picture. Okay, so that's our reference for our white balance. And then when we go back to the movie mode, and then just zoom out a bit. So you can see that the image is a bit warm from when I set it. It's not helping actually because I'm in the mezzanine now and we've got daylight coming in as well as the lights in the room, and it's getting a bit sunnier outside, which is why it's getting warmer. So what we can do now is go into the menu system, and under white balance we've got that set, as well as on the quick access menu it's the same thing essentially. And under quick white balance we want to use that picture that we've taken as a reference point, so we'll set it there and then just go OK. Okay, so now when we come out you can see that that's set to the custom white balance. While I'm here is just remind you that if you're on a tripod you want to make sure that the digital image stabilization is off. If you do use it on the Canon R6, on the standard setting, you can see there's a crop going in and then there's a further crop there. Okay, but on a tripod I'm going to take that off. In addition, there's the stabilizer, optical stabilizer on the lens. Okay, so I want to make sure that that's switched off when I'm using a tripod too. Now if you're going handheld at any capacity, then just switch your optical stabilization on and the IS as well to either standard or enhanced, depending on the situation and your own sort of ability to be steady when you're operating the camera. Okay, so image stabilization off. What we're going to do is go into the menu system first of all, and under the AF menu system, it's a bit quirky with some of the R6 cameras because there isn't a manual focus, autofocus switch on the lens. Some of them do have it, but some don't. So under page 1 of AF, you want to select MF there for manual focus. Okay, and then on page 2, we want to switch the focus guide on. Okay. And then what we can do is we want to use the magnifying tool. Now you can see there that when we press it, it cannot be magnified because it's in this face tracking mode. Okay, so what we can do is go into the quick access menu and then just choose the spot autofocus, and then that will allow us to expand the focus. And then what we can do, we can change the region that we want to be focused. Okay, in this instance it will be a human being, the eyes, so you just need to make sure that they're sharp. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll throw it out of focus first of all, and then allow us to sort of actually run through the process. Okay, so notice there's the video, the focus aid there as well, so we'll use that in a moment, and I can show you how to sort of use that as well in conjunction with the magnifying sort of technique. So magnifying technique, I mean, you can obviously eyeball it to a certain extent. Actually, let's use the focus guide now. So you can see that when you click on a particular area, that focus guide is telling us when we've got a focus on that particular area, and it will go green. There, okay? And if we expand into it, we can see that that's nice and sharp. Okay, so if you don't want to use the focus aid, or you didn't switch that on, you just don't get on with it, you just have to use the focus magnifying tool, move it into position, get your focus at ×5, and then you're kind of ×10, usually it's just double checking to make sure that it is actually super sharp where it is now. Okay, and now we know that our shot is in focus, so every time we just check the focus before we roll the camera, and then sort of like conduct the next question of the interview that you've got planned. Okay, so that's the kind of focusing side to things. You can also, if you want to, enable peaking, which gives you a kind of coloured overlay. You can sort of see, if I just get rid of some of the stuff, when I take it out of focus, you can see the area is starting to go a bit red. So that's just another sort of indication to show you which parts of the image are more in focus than not in focus. But I find actually the magnifying tool and the focus aid is the kind of like the one that I use the most probably. Okay. Also, you can obviously use autofocus. Okay, and just literally just touch the screen and it will focus on those particular areas. Okay, so play around with the different focus modes. and see what works best according to what situation you find yourself in. Okay, I'll just show you one more way that you can get the focus. So underneath, so I've kept it on autofocus, but this allows you to sort of like do manual focus while I've got the autofocus on. So under Lens Electronic MF, what you want to do is select Enabled Magnify. If you don't want it enabled, then obviously don't select that, select the one above. But you'll see that when we select the Enabled Magnify, what happens. So I'm going to set that, come out of there, and then what we'll do, we'll press the AF button. Okay, so when you press the and hold the AF button, this allows you to sort of focus into the area that you basically select. Okay, so AFN, and then as soon as you start turning that focus wheel, that allows you to sort of manually focus. Okay, so that's pretty nifty. That's a kind of less well-known way of sort of doing focus. Okay, so the audio levels, I haven't got any microphones rigged up, but you just have to sort of go into the mini jack microphone input here, and then it will override the two little microphones on the camera. And once you've done that, you then go into the first page, and under sound recording, you have to first of all switch that to manual. Okay, and then once you've done that, if you've obviously attended my audio fundamentals, which hopefully you have, you then just need to sort of do your PAL scenario where you're positioning the microphone and making sure it's angled in the right direction based on the signal that you're trying to record. So in this instance, someone's voice. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of hover over the camera so I'll get a bit closer to the source. And then what I'm basically doing is I'm selecting record level, and you can use the touchscreen or the wheel to basically reduce or increase the gain, the sensitivity of the microphone. Okay, so you'll get into the situation where you remember, oh yeah, what was it that Ray used to use, or what did you have for breakfast this morning? So as they're telling you what you had for breakfast this morning, you can then change it so that on average everything is hitting the -12. Try not to go below roughly -16 and above -6, definitely not 0 like this kind of scenario where it's going red, because that's starting to distort. Okay, so back. Now keep talking about what they had for breakfast, and maybe what did I have for breakfast this morning? I had crumpets with butter and jam. So that you can start to see that I'm hitting that -12 on average. Obviously it's not an exact science, there's going to be times when I'm a bit quieter and a bit louder, but on average, if you can hit that window between -16 and -6, and as much as possible -12, then you're in a good region. Okay. Once you've set it to manual, what you can also do in the menu, you can go to the quick access menu and then scroll down to here, and then you can basically set it here. And what's good is that once you've done that, you can also obviously adjust the headphone volume as well while you're doing that. Okay, so as a little bonus track, what I'm going to do is going to show you how to set up to shoot C-Log 3. Okay, so the R5 and the R6, one of the main reasons that you might want to shoot in C-Log or C-Log 3 is basically it's the only way you can shoot 10-bit video. Okay, it just means you've got lots more colours. Also, what you're doing this for is because you want to boost the usable dynamic range of your camera. Okay, they say that in C-Log 3 you get up to 12 stops of dynamic range, so take of that what you will. It's kind of like the intermediary between sort of like, say, a JPEG and RAW. It's kind of in the middle. It's not as good as RAW, but it's bit better than JPEG. The only downside is that when you record the footage, it's applying a kind of like desaturated and decontrasted sort of like curve on your image, so it looks all washed out and milky, and then you have to sort of basically revive it in post-production, and that'll be for another video to show you how to do that. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is go into the menu, and then under page 3, we'll go into catalog settings here. Okay, and then under catalog, we're going to go for C-Log 3 and go OK. Okay, and we're going to leave everything off. What we might do in a moment is switch View Assist on, and that will help you to sort of gauge the image that you're going to sort of like end up with, and make it a bit easier to sort of like judge the exposure and things like that. Okay, but we'll leave it off for the time being. Okay, so if we come out of there, you can see that it's really sort of washed out and milky now. Okay, so that's what log video looks like, whether it's S-Log Sony or C-Log Canon, V-Log Panasonic, etc. Okay, so it's thrown the sort of like focus out, so let's just refocus there. Okay, and you can see that we could judge the exposure by getting the histogram up. Now, the important thing, the most important thing, or one of the most important things when you're shooting in C-Log 3 with the R6 or the R5 is that the native ISO or the base ISO that gives you the best dynamic range and results in general is to make sure that you switch your ISO to 800. Okay? So that is going to give you the optimal results. Now, the view assist, if I just show you now, you can see it makes the image look back to normal. Basically, what it's doing is applying like a Rec 709 sort of correction onto the image to make it look like what it's supposed to look like without any kind of stylistic sort of grading to it. Okay, so the best way to judge the exposure is using an 18% grey card again. Okay, so if I just put that into frame, and then just, you can see that it's actually just overexposing a little bit, but I don't mind that, okay? But if you wanted it to sort of be spot on, then what you want to do is maybe, in this instance, you can lower the light if you want to, or you could actually just stop down there and you've got more of a potentially on the money kind of exposure. But I do like to overexpose just a little bit, like that. I was quite happy with that. Okay, and then take it away. If you look at the R5 PDF on a learning space, you can also learn how to do the zebras approach to gauging exposure. I mean, essentially, when you're filming human beings, obviously the skin tone is the sort of most vital part to get the exposure correct, as well as the white balance, as we've discussed before. Okay, so that's kind of like a kind of easy sort of way to sort of get the exposure correct. It obviously becomes more challenging when you've got like scenes with more dynamic range, where there's darker and brighter areas, and in which case, if there are particularly darker areas where you want to retain a bit more detail, then you just want to sort of like possibly punch in a little bit of light so that they aren't plunged into darkness, unless that's, again, the result you want. And equally with the brighter sort of areas that are potentially clipping the highlights, you want to sort of like deal with them somehow or just live with it. It really depends on sort of like what you control and what you can't control and what you're going to be happy to end up with from the results point of view. Okay, I know it sort of doesn't sound very sort of straightforward, but also there's lots of different scenarios out there, and I think, as I'll say from my own experience, you'll get kind of more familiar with what your camera is capable of and the feedback you get from it, and then once you sort of like get it into the edit suite and start dealing with it in post-production, you get an idea of like where you could improve from the shooting point of view so that it makes your job easier from the sort of like correcting point of view as well. It's definitely worth going through that process of shooting in log and then dealing with log in post-production, and then maybe just being kind of honest with yourself with your shortcomings from a shooting point of view. Generally speaking, what will happen is you'll either underexpose or overexpose, and you'll get to the point where you're just less likely to do either or. Okay, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully it was useful. I didn't go on too much. There's obviously lots of other different ways of doing all the things that I've shown you, and you can kind of watch YouTube and watch other sort of content creators go on their way about what they do. So this is almost like a little starting point. Always open to sort of like other sort of techniques. So if you come to one of my sessions and you feel like there's a better way of doing things, then come along with it and show me and prove me wrong. Okay, well, that's enough of me. Yeah, cheers and bye.